Blackbeard isn't evil, he just does things antagonistic from our main characters. He could be the hero this world needs, just like his father. Oh, how I wish this was true. I would definitely love to see a bit more nuance and a bit more grey area with Mr. Blackbeard, but I do think it's pretty hard to make the case for Teach not being evil at this point, or at the very least, being some kind of misunderstood good guy. Just because he did murder Thatch, he killed Whitebeard, he owned slaves, there's a lot of other bad things. And those bad things that we've seen, there's a lot we actually know about Blackbeard that makes him harder to redeem. As opposed to, say, Rox, who up until now we never saw. We just heard was a very bad dude. Heard from unreliable sources like Sengoku. Kind of like Loki, actually. We've just been told that this Loki is a bad guy, but we haven't really seen anything from him. And given how Rox turned out, I 100% expect Loki to be a misunderstood hero as well. Blackbeard though, mate, that is, it's a rough ask. At the moment, I see Blackbeard as yet another example of a demon that the world government have created for themselves. In their demonization of Rox Diesebek, they ended up actually creating what they portrayed Rox as. A monster from the Davy clan that has manifested to bring their worst nightmares to fruition. Although there's a very important step that we're missing here, which is who Blackbeard's mentor figure is going to be. Because there are a lot of One Piece characters who have gone past this exact intersection of tragedy. Nico Robin very easily could have become the demon that the world government claims she was, and we do actually see this happen in Oda's Dark Timeline drawings of her. But Robin had the fortune of meeting Jaguar D. Sol, who shaped her life in a positive way. Meanwhile, to look at an example on the other side, Charlotte Lin Lin, she could have become a force of good, but she had her life negatively shaped by Streusen. So we're still missing a very important piece of the Blackbeard puzzle here. Because at this point in time, 38 years ago, Marshall D. Teach has the potential to go on to become a Luffy or a Roger, but something unknown at this stage pushes him down the opposite direction. Eris cooked up delicious cherry pies for Teach when he was little. That is exactly what the answer is, isn't it? If Blackbeard's love of cherry pies is because his mother used to make them for him, then it would be tragically adorable. And that is the sort of thing that just may open up a crack of redemption. Not that I think that Blackbeard can ever be fully redeemed at this stage, but it might result in Blackbeard taking some sort of important action that ensures the dawn of the world, because he still possesses that lingering love for his mother. Blackbeard using Saturn's body to help take over the world government is obviously going to be satisfying, given that Saturn, through Emu, is likely responsible for Rox's death. So this is referring to chapter 1107, when Katarina Devon touched Saint Saturn in his spider form, and given that she has a mythical devil fruit that allows her to take on the appearance of those she has touched, it does seem as though the Blackbeard pirates are going to use Saturn's form in the future, or potentially even as we speak. You may have forgotten this because I think it happened back in June? But Marijois is currently on fire and under attack. We don't know by who, but the Blackbeard pirates are one of the main candidates. Although I should emphasize that it was never Blackbeard's plan to gain access to Saturn's form. That was more or less lucky, or dare I say even a fated event, because it is interesting that Emu appears to have used Saturn's body to kill Blackbeard's father, and now Blackbeard is going to use Saturn's body for some nasty acts against Emu probably. This is temporal poetry. We've got to rhyme through time. A year ago, the idea of Luffy and Blackbeard as reluctant allies was absurd given the death of Ace. Now I have to wonder what Oda is planning with the most recent reveals. The two of them have always already kind of been unwilling allies. Neither one of them, not a Luffy, not a Blackbeard, would be where they are today without the actions of the other, which is especially cruel for Luffy, but it is true. And I fully expect that dynamic to continue all the way through to the dawn of the world, because you cannot have a dawn without there first being a tremendous darkness. I just wanted to share a feeling I've had since the Five Elders. Everybody that uses the Emu regeneration doesn't scare me as antagonists. They are great characters, but I do not feel that overwhelming sense of dread because they seem so weak in comparison. So I'm not a doctor, but I'm going to diagnose you with the symptoms of the regeneration problem, which has been an issue in shonen manga for a long time, particularly with Dragon Ball. But the issue is that in order to showcase a regeneration ability, you need to have characters being severely wounded. For example, in chapter 1162, we see Figaland Garling with, mate, look at this. His head is split open and it is slowly regenerating back to normal. And it looks very cool. It's such a wonderful showcase of a regeneration ability. ability. It's very almost body horror-esque. However, if this had happened to any other One Piece character, then they would probably be dead. And regeneration only really looks cool when you use it for these kind of fatal injuries. But what it does, right, is it artificially creates the illusion that characters with regeneration are weaker and or more incompetent than those who do not have those powers, because the regeneration characters receive these fatal injuries on a scarily regular basis. And you never see people like Roger or Rayleigh getting their brain split open because they can't recover from that. And so it artificially elevates them to looking more powerful and more competent as a result. I will say this effect does have some in-world logic to it though, because if I had these sort of regeneration powers, then I would be a lot less careful as well, because I'd know that, if I got my head cut off, it wouldn't matter. I would know that there are not any consequences to making mistakes. And so it makes perfect sense that characters with regeneration are just less competent than characters without it. But that sort of carelessness often doesn't help to craft compelling antagonists. And if you're going to do that, you need an extra factor like, say, Big Mom. She is an incredibly careless fighter, but that is because she has the mind of a child, so it works well for her character. However, for those who are portrayed as more mentally competent, like the Holy Knights and the Elder Stars, it does have the effect of making them look quite sloppy. And I do think that this regeneration ability is a curse that Oda has now placed on himself, because he has a lot of work to do to really make these guys feel intimidating again. And to bring Blackbeard back into this is why I feel so good about him as an upcoming antagonist, because even though he uses a Logia fruit, it specifically does not allow him to regenerate like other Logias. So at the very least, Blackbeard probably will not have this problem. Internet man, is it just me who is beginning to feel like this flashback is going to be the longest we have seen? It feels like ages ago that we had an appearance of Loki or Harold, and we still have a long way to go. So I've already seen a lot of people in the comments claiming that this is the longest flashback in One Piece, but we're not quite there yet. Kozuki Oden's flashback was about 15 chapters long. It went from chapter 960 to 974. Meanwhile, this flashback is currently 10 chapters, but I will grant that it probably feels longer because back in the Oden flashback days, we didn't have quite as many breaks between chapters. But for this to become the longest flashback in One Piece, the number that we are looking for is 1168. If we hit that and we are still reading these black pages, then it will become the new Flashback King. And with the current publishing schedule, chapter 1168 would be happening in December, and it would be the second last chapter published of this year. Potentially even the last one if there's another unexpected break, and potentially delayed till 2026 if there's more than one unexpected break. Either way, at this point, I'm pretty comfortable in saying that we are more than likely spending the rest of the year in this Elbaf flashback. Because sure, God Valley's going to end soon, probably real soon, but then we need to actually cover, all of the Elbaf stuff. While I am absolutely loving this backstory, I feel like it has definitely crossed the line in its placement in the story. I would have preferred if this came at either the end or the beginning of Elbaf. Remember, we were really just starting the big fight before we got caught on this train. So I 100% get why you would have this feeling. Back in my day, I felt very similar when the Straw Hats were finally face to face with CP9 on any Sobby, with fantastic some fight battles about to begin, and then bam! We were hit with Robin backstory, and my 16-year-old self did the mental maths and realized that we wouldn't be getting any action for about a month, which felt like a really long time when I was that age. And I really did not appreciate flashbacks anywhere near as much as I do now. In fact, now it's pretty much completely the opposite. I tend to look forward to flashbacks much more so than the big final fights, because flashbacks are where all of the cool reveals and all of the best writing happens, in my opinion. And while they do issue a hard pause on modern events, I don't know if there's a better way to place One Piece flashbacks. Because what Oda is trying to achieve is priming the audience for a satisfying defeat of a villain. Because when you think about it, many of Luffy's iconic punches lose their weight if we do not have these tragedies fresh in our minds. Like Luffy's first punch of Arlong coming right after Nami's flashback, and the incredible satisfaction we feel because that Nami wound is still very much open. But if you leave too much time between the flashback and the final fight, then that wound, it has time to heal. Which is a problem that I actually think Oda encountered during the raid on Onigashima. We had the full Oden flashback, and so we were primed to take on the Kaido, but over the 2 years that the raid took to publish, the feeling of the Odin flashback got a bit lost, and that's why during year 2 of the raid, a lot of weekly readers started to disconnect from the relentless action. And look, not to defend the Toei anime too hard here, but the one thing that you will never be allowed to forget in the anime is the feeling of the flashbacks, because they will be referenced for filler at every possible opportunity. But that's why you can't do the flashbacks too early, because they need to be as close as possible to the final action, and you can't do them afterwards, because that would be like asking someone to be hungry after having eaten a full meal. In defense of the commenter though, look, traditionally One Piece flashbacks are nowhere near this long. 4 to 6 chapters is the standard for the bulk of the series, so suddenly jumping into a 10 to 15 chapter side story can be a bit annoying if you were really invested in what was happening on Elbaf. Because to do the maths, by the time that we get out of this flashback, it will have been about 6 months since we last saw modern day Elbaf. That is a long time. So I can definitely understand the frustration in an author asking you, no, just wait half a year and then we'll get back to what we were doing. The Vivia Card data book is getting more things wrong. This time it said that Katakuri ate his devil fruit 43 years ago, but the God Valley incident happened 38 years ago. So that is correct, or I guess I should say that is incorrect, as we have another Vivia Card plot hole and or / retcon, as it does say that Katakuri ate his devil fruit when he was 5 years old. However, Big Mom here was trying to secure Kaido's devil fruit for Katakuri on God Valley when he was 10 years old. And this is purely an Oda fault, because he doesn't write the Vivia Cards entirely by himself, but he does give previously unknown information like this. These little facts are not just made up by some guy. I will say it's not really a big deal, and this is kind of showing the purpose of the Vivia Card data book. If you're not familiar, it is what is referred to as a living data book, meaning that character entries are constantly updated and receive new cards, so nothing is ever 100% set in stone. And another example of this would be Caesar Clown. The Vivia Card data book originally listed him as being 40 years old, but after Oda introduced Mads, Caesar had another 15 years added to his age so that he could actually be old enough to have been part of Mads, and now he is canonically 55 years old instead of 40. So the dude lost almost as many years of his life as Momonosuke did, all for the sake of continuity. And as a side note, this is probably why Oda is usually quite purposely vague in the manga itself, because if these details are printed in the manga, then they do become genuine plot holes that cannot be fixed. But because no one really takes the Vivia Card data book 100% seriously, it allows Oda to give out these details to satisfy strange men on the internet, but to put an asterisk next to those details that gives Oda the freedom to change them later. Man in the internet, are we not going to talk about Whitebeard encountering the Gods Knights and possibly Emu, then years later still pulling up to try and save Ace? Pretty crazy in hindsight. I don't know, given the showing of the Holy Knight so far, I'm not sure if they would have been a huge concern. But also, Emu can't just go ahead and show himself at Marineford because he would have been revealing himself to the world, or I guess revealing the world to its citizens. However, if things had gone differently and the Whitebeard pirates were in a spot to come out victorious, like let's say for example that Kaido and the Beast Pirates weren't stopped by Shanks, and Marineford was looking to be the defeat of the Marines at the hands of 2 emperors, and thus Emu or the Elder Stars or both may have had to step in at that point. But look, even if Emu did show up, what would it change? Whitebeard was never just going to let Ace be executed. So it doesn't really matter what the world government threw at him. Also, at the time, Whitebeard believed that Ace would be the man to inherit Roger's will. So I don't think that Whitebeard even saw Ace's death as a possible outcome. However, he did know that his own death would have a role to play in saving the life of his son, and therefore the son that would go on to bring about the dawn of the world. That was the theory anyway. Honestly, I'm surprised to think that Yamato's cover story is over when it hasn't been fully shown to be the case yet, as I'm usually the sort of person who waits till there is more conclusive proof. Though you can go ahead and explain why that is or is not the case if you wish. Yeah, I can explain that. Yamato's cover story is over because all cover stories end with the words final volume, which indicates that we are done and moving on. I wish that we weren't, because I feel like there's a lot more that could have been done with this cover story, and I really want to at least have a tease for what Yamato plans to do now, but it is what it is. Hey, Australian fictional pirate lover. what if for the God Valley flashback, Toei adapts it into a movie? That way it's canon, and it will actually be something people want to watch. I mean, in defense of Film Red, that was something that people, at least with all of the money speaking, wanted to watch. But my thoughts on this happening would be extremely mixed. Firstly, adapting this 10 to 15 chapters into a movie would be pretty phenomenal, and purely from a business perspective, Toei has to be looking at the success of stuff like Demon Slayer, Infinity Castle, Jujutsu Kaisen 0, and the Chainsaw Man movie and thinking, hey guys, maybe making canon movies is a pretty damn good idea. However, I'd also argue that One Piece is still very much going off in its own direction. It really hasn't adapted to the modern anime scene at all. But also it doesn't necessarily need to, because again, Film Red was successful on such a level that I still don't think most of us appreciate. It made $250 million, and it's not only by far the highest grossing One Piece film of all time, but it is the 7th highest grossing Japanese film of all time. Not just anime films, movies in general. But the main reason why I don't think there will ever be a God Valley film is because it would be a movie without Luffy and the Straw Hats, which for people who watch men talk about fictional pirates on the internet is not a big deal, because characters like Rox and Roger, they are just as much, if not more, of a selling point than seeing Luffy. But Film Red really made its money because it pushed out into a general audience who are not fully consumed by One Piece lore. They have more of a vague awareness of the world and its characters, and you are gonna have a rough time getting them into a theater without putting Luffy on a poster. But it's also hard to see a God Valley movie being made because it removes material for the anime to adapt, and it makes their job of producing an episode every week even harder than it already is. Taking away 15 chapters for a movie is actively removing 6 months worth of material for the anime, because One Piece isn't on a seasonal model like Demon Slayer, like Jujutsu Kaisen, like the Chainsaw Man, and like every other modern anime that takes advantage of making canon films. So TLDR, I think it would be pretty awesome, but there is no way it's happening. I think Oda is testing the waters with all the emphasis on love in Elbaf, and making it one of the biggest reasons for God Valley just makes me think that the Void Century flashback will be about love too. So this is definitely what One Piece is from here on out. Not necessarily romantic love, but I think that parental love is going to be an enduring theme for the rest of the series. Oda has had much more of a focus on kids and their parents in post-time skip One Piece, which is very much the opposite of what he did in pre-time skip, with more of an emphasis on found family. And this parental child focus is only intensifying with each new arc. And I doubt that the Void Century will be much different. In fact, it'll be the most important of all, because the Void Century is where we need to establish the power of inherited will and passing that will down to the next generation. Also, I can't help but think there's probably going to be some elements of romance as well, or at least it looks like there will be with Emu and Lily, be that a one-sided romance or not. But you let me know in the comments, what do you expect to see in the Void Century flashback?